Wearable technology currently exists in a state of limbo, residing between pretty cool, gimmicky stuff to stuff that you actually need to have. The question in most people's minds is where the tech currently is in between those two, so that they can choose whether or not to spend their hard-earned money on these freaking things. Well, after a month of daily driving the Galaxy Watch 3, I can comfortably say that I am still not sure where exactly it is right now. And I'll explain why in this video, the review of the Samsung Galaxy Watch 3, the wearable that made me realize why some people are really excited about this tech, and also why some people remain somewhat skeptical. Start us off with the build quality. I don't think I need to say this, but the construction of the Galaxy Watch 3 feels exceptional. Its stainless steel body combined with the Gorilla Glass DX screen at the front makes it feel heavier than it seems, especially for its size. The rotating bezel on the front is, well, it's an excellent fidget toy, and despite how gimmicky it first appears, using it to navigate the watch has become second nature to me, as has the layout of the side buttons. Though I will say, as a righty who wears his watch on the, right, the awkward positioning on it makes it feel a little bit harder for me to reach with my left hand, but that's kind of on me than the watch itself. The dense body is connected to a pretty nice leather strap. You know, it looks nice, but it also wears out faster than a standard rubber one. Still, the overall feel is very premium and just outstanding. And that density is not there for no reason. Samsung has packed this thing with great hardware for smartwatches. The aforementioned Gorilla Glass DX screen, AMOLED screen mind you, with always-on functionality and 364 pixel per inch density that looks great in whatever environment you're on. The array of sensors that include the heart rate monitor, accelerometer, gyroscope, and barometer. And of course, at its very heart, the Exynos 9110, a dual-core ARM Cortex-A53 1.15 GHz SoC built on Samsung's 10nm process running Tizen OS 5.5 with a gig of RAM and 8 gigs of internal storage. Though it should be noted that that internal storage is not upgradable because there's no SD card slot on here. And all of that is powered by a tiny 320 mAh battery. The Exynos SoC supports 2.5 GHz Wi-Fi, GPS functionality, and Bluetooth 5.0 to connect to your phone. More on that later. The watch itself is IP68 water resistant and is compliant with a military standard for durability, which isn't that surprising given its heft, but still, as well as other standards for ECG and all that good stuff. Basically, it's a flagship smartwatch with the specs to back it up. Of course, you can have the best hardware in the world, but the software experience can make or break its user experience. As mentioned, the watch is running Samsung's custom Tizen OS version 5.5, meaning that it's technically not part of the Android Watch ecosystem. Not running Wear OS means that you can't use Android Wear to connect to it. Instead, you have to use the Galaxy Wearables app. This app is pre-installed in most Samsung phones, as controversial as that can of worms may be, but still. For everyone else, you have to download it from somewhere like the Google Play Store, along with the other plugins and crap that you need to get the full experience. Of course, you can run it in standalone mode, and the apps can still work fine since it does have its own Wi-Fi chipset, meaning that it doesn't have to rely on the phone's connection to your home Wi-Fi. And the fitness tracking features also seem to work fine. But again, if you want the full experience, you have to connect it to your phone. It interfaces via Bluetooth just like every other smartwatch, but unlike every other smartwatch that I've used, it locks onto one device. What I mean by this is that it's only visible to the device that you initially connected to on startup, and if you want to migrate to a different device, you need to wipe the watch and all the data in it. Thankfully, during setup, Samsung forces you to connect a Samsung account to use the Wearables app, and you can back up settings and other data to your Samsung account so you can restore them later. The setup process itself does take a while, but after that, it's mostly a seamless experience. The watch's interface is fairly intuitive, and if you don't like it, it does have some customizations like changing the app drawer interface and stuff like that. It also allows you to change the watch face. You can set the watch face to be always on, and you can choose from a myriad of default ones or the literally hundreds from the Samsung store. The brightness in always on mode is fairly bright enough for indoor use, but it's certainly not bright enough outdoors. Wake up gestures include pressing the side buttons, turning the bezel, touching the watch, or the raise to wake feature, and all of these can be turned on or off. By default, touching the screen does not turn on the watch, and I left that on there because it avoids the watch going all over the place when you say touch something by the side. As for the other gestures, well, pressing the button is fairly standard. Touching the bezel does have some problems, like delayed wakes if you don't rotate it enough, or turning to the next page if you rotate it too much, but also overall works fine. And the raise to wake gesture is, well, it depends on your situation. Most of the time, it works great. The gyro data itself is pretty accurate and it wakes up pretty much instantly. The other times, it just doesn't register the gesture or mistake a simple hand movement for one. That would be fine, except that the small amount of time that it doesn't register are also times when I genuinely needed to wake it up. Like biking, for example, where I can't easily press the button or touch the bezel, and I need to turn on the watch to look at the time or the exercise data in the middle of the day with the sun blazing towards me, so always on isn't bright enough. In fairness, that is a fairly difficult task since the gyro has to account for the heightened position of the arm during the ride itself, like this, and the bumps and movement, constant movement and bumps that it experiences during the ride. Thankfully, when it does work, the screen automatically brightens to daylight mode from whatever brightness you initially set it to, and that daylight mode is actually bright enough to use outdoors. Personally, I set the watch on a fairly low brightness initially because it's bright enough for most situations. Although even that daylight mode thing isn't that perfect, and there is some problems, like when you're outside but in a shade like a tree, for example, it sometimes doesn't register. As for the fitness tracking features, well, I've used them extensively, and I've found that aside from biking, running, and maybe walking, manual tracking of other things is just kind of useless to me. During exercise, I don't like being distracted by setting stuff on my watch and things, so I just usually take it off. Even doing jumping jacks and sit-ups, I just didn't find the tracking useful. In fact, actually, I found myself using the timer for jumping jacks rather than the tracker, since for some odd reason, it doesn't notify you when your goal is done. The auto tracking works most of the time, only missing a few times in the month or so that I've had it on use, and the sleep tracking feature is honestly one of my favorite. As an insomniac, it's interesting and perhaps even necessary for me to have a record of my sleep as a reference for my health. And it's awesome that it actually does work really well. Heartbeat and blood pressure monitors work fine, though I have no way of verifying their actual efficacy, so your mileage may vary. And the VO2 max in aerobic exercises also works fine, I guess. Caveat the same. The barometer needs a separate app that isn't pre-installed to be used, but once it's installed, it actually works pretty well. Honestly, that's the whole interface experience. Works well most of the time. Settings are easily accessible here, and the music controls through your watch is something I never understood until I started using it. Works well with most apps and even YouTube, though you can't scrub videos on your smartwatch. Which leads us actually to the phone pairing experience. The Galaxy Wearable app is easy enough to use and auto-installs the plugins you need to work with your watch, which is pretty handy. You can set settings in it and update your watch through it, but only through it. You cannot update your watch standalone, which is kind of a drag. The Samsung Fitness app also works pretty well, though in the first few weeks I didn't, or rather couldn't use it because it needed Android 7 to work, and I was dailying an Oppo F1s, which only had Android 5.1, though I don't know who to blame for that. Oppo. Anyways, even after switching to my new daily, it's actually recording the audio, I found that I don't actually use it that much anyways, though the data being there when I need it is still a nice to have. Notifications do work reasonably well. There were some instances where it didn't work immediately, though again, I don't know who I should blame for this, because Oppo is also rather infamous for power optimization above all else and does not always pass the notifications through even on the phone itself, which actually leads us pretty nicely to battery life. The watch does not have any ports, so it charges through this included Qi wireless charger. Be warned though, as I have read that while it uses Qi, it actually does not charge using just regular Qi wireless charging pads, which may be an issue for people who have those. For cavemen like me who stuff on wires, the included one works fine, though hot. Seriously, this thing gets toasty when charging the watch. And also, Samsung does not include a power brick, so I had to use one I already had for me to actually charge the bloody thing. Thankfully, it doesn't take a while for the device to charge, thanks to its small capacity, and after a full charge, it can comfortably last me about a day and change sometimes, provided I don't use the tracking features too much. A 30-minute straight tracking during a jog will drain your battery life by 10 to 15%. Though thankfully, during that time, it doesn't get hot. Also, you can just sip charge from time to time, thanks to its fairly fast charging times, which gives you about 1% every minute or so. This is especially useful if you want to track your sleep. Just sip charge it before you go to bed, and then again once you wake up and go to the shower. Go back with the watch fully charged and then repeat. For days where it functions mostly just as a watch and notification reminder, so basically most days in an office, this routine works well, though if you do use the fitness tracking features much, you need to augment it with more sip charges in between. Honestly though, after a few weeks, my concern became less about battery life per day and more about battery life longevity. Lithium ions are terrible at this, where the more cycles you put a battery through, it loses most of its charge. Charging this full every day means 365 cycles in a year. With such a small battery, I have legitimate concerns about its longevity. Now, it might be the case that Samsung is hiding a reserve capacity on the battery, much like, every manufacturer with a brain, so it doesn't degrade that much, but still, that degradation will happen. And with a device as integrated as this, it will become an issue and may render the thing useless in just a few short years. I mean, who would use a watch that has like 5 hours of battery life? Now, there are screws in the watch that you might be able to unscrew and maybe open it, but I didn't bother since, while it looks Phillips enough, it does have a torque-ish look, and I have no idea how the waterproofing will work after it's been removed even just once. Also, I'm pretty dang sure that it will void the warranty. Proper power management by the hardware, the software, and the user will prolong its life. Just don't charge it every day like that, and just, be careful with your battery. But there's only so much you can do. Still, the fact that the Exynos 9110 in here basically just sips power, and the supposed optimizations within Tizen OS to increase battery life and longevity, apparently, is a fairly nice thing to have. Though that does bring us right back to software. Android phone manufacturers don't exactly have a great track record on software support, and Samsung is definitely no exception. While they have improved over the years, there's still some doubt in me about their dedication in supporting their products over the few years. Say what you want about Wear OS, at least it's Google who maintains it, and of course the Apple Watch remains gold standard for support, at least if you don't look far enough into history. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not the kind who would just update when a new software is out, and I will not deny that I do sometimes delay critical updates just because of laziness, but at least give me the option to update if I have the time. It's a funny thing to me, hearing the Windows folks complaining about forced updates and the Android folks complaining about the lack thereof, because it shows to me that despite the awful things that they do, Apple still does software support pretty well. Or do they? This leads us to a discussion about ecosystems and walled gardens. As mentioned before, this watch is technically not part of the Android watch ecosystem, meaning that if Samsung abandons development of these, it's over. You can argue the same about Android Wear, but the thing is, there are so many devices running it, not just from one company, that there's almost a guarantee that someone somewhere will continue to develop for these even after Google's full support, just because of how many devices there are running it. And that right there is the core of the issue. Samsung's insistence in trying to be Apple has led them here. Samsung used to use Wear OS until they abandoned it for their homegrown OS. That would be fine, sort of, with a caveat that, all the support is hanging on to them. But again, that would be fine if Samsung dedicated themselves into supporting these for at least a few years, or, half a decade, say. But get this. The new Galaxy Watch 4, successor to this and actually released in the making of this script, will be running Wear OS. The cynic in me has already started counting down the time on how long Tizen OS will continue to be supported. I mean, you would still be able to use the thing. It's not like if software gets lost, it's paperweight. It's just frustrating that we continue to face the same problems over and over again. Walled gardens ruining support. Yes, Tizen OS is way more open than Apple's, OS for the Apple Watch, but only because they have to. I'm sure that Samsung would love for you to run a Samsung-only life, but without the same degree of control as Apple has, they've been forced to be more consumer-friendly. It's probably just the cynic in me, but it leaves a bad taste in what otherwise is a fantastic product to use. That's the thing. I don't hate this watch. I absolutely love it. But the walled garden OS that Samsung has packed in here, one that they're abandoning for a different one just a generation later, makes me feel less hopeful about Samsung's commitment in supporting these. I hope I'm wrong, but it goes to show why most people continue to say that the best thing is a thing without a computer. Without having software to rely on, one that needs updates from the parent company to be useful in some regard, plain watches will last a very long time, almost literally forever. These, while you can use them unsupported, its value is a much more complicated arrangement because of that software. Even then though, the watch itself is great. There are annoyances, but most of them are fairly minor. What makes it tough to recommend is the price. MSRP of 18,000 pesos, or almost $400. It's priced as a flagship to compete with the Apple Watch. For people who aren't already rocking a flagship anything, especially a flagship phone, just skip this one and look for something like a Galaxy Active Watch, or some of those watches from Xiaomi, Huawei, or basically any other smartwatch. Because this is clearly meant as a flagship to go with those flagship big boy devices. For those who do, well, this watch is a serious competitor to the Apple Watch, and I'm actually surprised that I didn't see a lot of coverage for it. If you're dailying an Android phone, especially a Samsung phone, like a Note or a Galaxy S, it will integrate almost flawlessly to it, so long as you understand that Tizen OS has a timer on its life at this point. Though, there is another side to this. The release of the Galaxy Watch 4 may, or more likely, since I didn't actually check by the filming of this, has dropped prices for these, which makes those a bit easier to swallow. The industrial design, snappy interface, and great looking appearance may make it worth it for some people and utterly useless for those who are not already deep into these things. It did not quite fully convert me, though I will definitely have to adjust if I have to say goodbye to it. Oh. Ow. Thanks for watching, folks. This was quite a video to make. Please let me know if you like this style of review or not. I would definitely appreciate the feedback. If you want to see my rambling unboxing, click, I don't know, here I guess, and subscribe if you want more. I'll see you all again soon. Thanks.